My parents skipped my wedding for my brother's vacation. So I got married without them and cut them off the moment they came crying for forgiveness. I got married in a quiet and personal ceremony. It was originally supposed to include just our families and a few very close friends. But sadly, maybe, in a strange way, thankfully, my family didn't come. To be more accurate, they could have made it, but they chose to take a vacation to Australia with my brother and his family. Instead, that trip felt like a bigger priority for them. My wife and I had been together for 6 years, and we got engaged about 10 months earlier. We hadn't formally invited anyone or sent out invitations until 4 weeks before the wedding, but we both knew when we wanted to tie the knot. And we told our families 8 months in advance so they could keep their calendars open. When our big day finally came around, my parents had assured me they'd keep that in mind, and honestly, I didn't expect them to do what they ultimately did. But maybe I should have, because I've always had a bit of a tense relationship with my parents. I was raised in a household where my brother was known as the brilliant child, and I was seen as the troublemaker. He's 8 years older than me, and growing up, he always seemed better at everything, whether it was academics, sports, or other activities. Naturally, I felt overshadowed by him when I was younger, but I assumed that feeling would eventually fade. Maybe it would have if my brother hadn't been so full of himself. He always went out of his way to get under my skin. He'd constantly tease and bully me in front of his friends. And since I was a small kid, it was pretty easy for him to do it. I'd often go to our parents to complain, but they never bought my side of the story. To them, my brother was the golden child, flawless and incapable of doing anything wrong. So this went on for years. By the time I got to high school, the resentment I had built up toward him was so intense that I started making trouble on purpose. If I couldn't be the golden boy like him, then at least people would remember me for something else, right? I had always been a bit rebellious as a kid, and that side of me only grew stronger over time. By then, my brother had already started working, and even then, he couldn't resist bragging all the time. Then one day, not long after I'd finished high school, he made a smug comment about me being a failure or something along those lines, and I completely snapped. He'd been pushing me for years, and that day, we finally went at it. That fight happened nearly a decade ago, and we haven't spoken since. I'm honestly glad about that. I feel like my life got a lot better once I cut him out, and I think I released a lot of the pent-up anger I had for him the day I punched him. Sure, I got pretty beat up too, but I was proud that I at least gave him a black eye, one he absolutely deserved, of course. My parents were furious with me afterward. They believed I had started the whole thing and deliberately provoked him. They had never been willing to accept that my brother was the one constantly provoking me and pushing me toward a breaking point. Even on the day of the fight, they didn't believe me. They treated me with cold detachment for weeks after that. Things only started to improve when I left for college. Maybe it was because they were about to become empty nesters and wanted to mend things before I was gone, but I never forgot how unfairly they had treated me. Even though we kept in touch, I couldn't shake the feeling of being the one who was always blamed. The only reason I invited them to my wedding at all was because they were the only family I had. I'm not really close with any extended relatives, and sadly, my grandparents have already passed away. Despite the distance in our relationship, my parents and I had still made some effort to stay in contact over the past 10 years. They'd even tried to convince me to reconcile with my brother several times, but I don't think either of us ever truly wanted to. My brother got married around 6 years ago, and now he has 2 kids. I wasn't invited to his wedding, and, honestly, I didn't care. My parents had even tried to convince me to invite him to my wedding this time around, but that was never going to happen. I know he's still the same arrogant, unbearable jerk he's always been. We still see each other during the holidays when we visit home, and his attitude hasn't changed one bit. The only difference is that we completely ignore each other. Now we act like the other doesn't exist. I'm also well aware that my parents still favor him more than they do me. That part isn't new. But even with that knowledge, I hadn't expected them to just take off on vacation with him and his family and not even care that I was getting married at the same time. I can't prove it, but deep down I feel like he did this on purpose. He knew that if it ever came down to a choice, our parents would pick him over me, because that's what they've done all our lives. Maybe he wanted me to feel hurt, and to some extent, it worked because right now, I feel completely awful about the entire situation. A couple of weeks ago, just after we sent out the official invitations, my parents came to visit me. They told me that they probably wouldn't be able to attend the wedding. Just 3 days earlier, my brother had invited them to join his family for a trip to Australia. It was an all-expenses paid vacation reward he received from a client he had. Greatly impressed, he wanted to take the whole family along. Since my brother had already scheduled his time off and everything was set, they claimed it couldn't be rescheduled. Instead, they expected me to postpone my wedding. According to them, since the ceremony was small, just friends and family, and we were using a venue owned by one of my wife's relatives, it would be easier for me to push the date back. They said they were really excited to spend time with their grandkids and hoped I'd understand. I wanted to argue, I wanted to scream, but instead, I just smiled and told them, okay, I'll wait. They were so oblivious that they actually believed me. They seemed pleased and left without a second thought. I talked to my wife afterward, and even she was stunned. We always knew my brother mattered more to them, but for them to shove me aside this obviously it was beyond disrespectful. Naturally, we had no plans of postponing anything. We decided we would go ahead with the wedding, whether they were there or not. So 5 days ago, on the day we had originally planned, we got married. That evening, we posted pictures online. It came as a complete shock to my parents, especially because I had promised them I'd wait, and clearly, I hadn't. When they saw the photos, they immediately began calling and texting me. But I ignored everything. It was my wedding day, and I wasn't about to let their drama ruin it. I didn't even read their messages until the next morning, when I woke up and finally went through the texts. They were exactly what I expected. They said they were extremely disappointed in me and claimed they never imagined I'd betray them like this. So, I decided to call them and confront them. I had so much to say, and I knew they probably did too. They picked up the call quickly, and right away, they began yelling. They said they had never felt more humiliated than they did the day before. Apparently, everyone in the family had been shocked that they weren't at the wedding. Since I'm not very close to the rest of my relatives and I'm known to be a bit of an introvert, no one expected to be invited themselves, but they all assumed my parents would be there. When they saw the photos and realized my parents hadn't shown up, they started asking questions. Of course, it was just like my parents to be more embarrassed about what others thought than to care about what they had actually done to me. Still, I decided it was time I finally said what I had been holding back all this time. So I told them, tell me that I was being unreasonable, that I was overreacting, but instead, I told them straight up that I had no real intention of waiting for them to come back from their trip with my brother's family, even though I said I would. I knew arguing would be pointless. There was no way they'd ever say no to a vacation with their precious golden boy, even if it meant missing my wedding. I already had so much on my plate, I didn't have the energy to fight with them about it. That's why I just told them I'd wait, because it was easier. In my mind, I was completely justified in how I handled it. I didn't owe them an explanation. I reminded them of everything they'd done in the past, how they never believed me when I said my brother was cruel and arrogant, how they always treated me unfairly. Even now, they couldn't see that my brother had deliberately chosen this time to invite them on vacation, knowing full well he was more important to them, and that if he could get them to skip my wedding, he'd win. And that's exactly what happened. They proved, once and for all, that he mattered more than I did. So, as far as I was concerned, they had no right to question any of my choices anymore. I was done being pushed aside. I was about to end the call when they suddenly said something that caught me off guard. Apparently, my brother didn't even know I was getting married at the same time. They said that if I had just told them I truly wanted them there and that I wasn't willing to wait, they would have canceled the trip and stayed with me instead. But instead of being honest, they said, I chose to play mind games and was now painting myself as the victim in a situation I'd created. That wasn't the reaction I expected, so I stayed on the line and let them keep talking. They told me that they never even mentioned my wedding to my brother, and since I hadn't invited anyone else from the family, nobody else knew either. According to them, he invited them on the trip without knowing I had anything planned, and there was no malicious intent behind it. They said the real reason they wanted to speak to me before giving him an answer was that they realized opportunities like this wouldn't come often anymore. My brother had been swamped with his new business, and the chances of a family vacation like this happening again were slim. So they wanted to talk to me first and ask if I'd be willing to push the wedding by a couple of weeks. They claimed that if I had just said no, they would have canceled the trip and been there for my big day. Then they addressed the past. They admitted that maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong to never even consider that my brother could have treated me badly. But they also said I hadn't helped my own Kasai was always stirring up trouble, seeking attention in the most disruptive ways, making myself a burden within the family. So when I tried to convince them that he was tormenting me, they found it hard to believe. And hearing them put it like that, I couldn't deny they had a point. Still, I wasn't in any mindset to let them off the hook. I accused them of lying, said they were bluffing about whether my brother knew about the wedding or not. And even if he didn't, I argued that they never would have told me the truth after I called him out for doing it on purpose. I told them that if they had really wanted to be there for me, they wouldn't have asked me to reschedule at all. They would have just shown up. They wouldn't have even entertained the idea of going off on a trip with my brother and leaving me behind on such an important day. I accused them of making up stories to justify their actions, trying to gaslight me into believing I wasn't the victim. Hears that somehow. All of this was my fault. I expected them to argue, but instead, they told me I still hadn't grown out of my old habits and was the same troublemaker who always craved attention in the worst ways. Then they just hung up. I could tell they were deeply disappointed. My mom had clearly been crying, heartbroken that I'd shared photos from the wedding while she was away on vacation, as if it meant absolutely nothing to me. Even though I was furious and hurt by them, I hadn't even tried to see things from their perspective during those first few days. But now, the more I think about the conversation we had, the less sure I feel that I was in the right. At first, I was so confident that I hadn't done anything wrong. But now, I'm not so sure, of course. I can't prove whether my brother knew when I was getting married or if he did it all deliberately. But I have this nagging gut feeling that my parents must have mentioned my wedding, and he specifically chose that time to plan the trip and bring them along. It all feels too convenient to be a coincidence. But again, that's just a feeling. I have no proof. And if, by some chance, I'm wrong, then maybe I did screw things up. And that's the problem. I don't know anything for sure. I still believe that if my parents truly wanted to be at my wedding, they never would have even considered going on vacation during that time. They wouldn't have asked me to reschedule or put me in that position. But at the same time, I can't deny that if I'd actually talked to them, maybe things would have turned out differently. I don't know. What I do know is that they were right about one thing. I never made it easy for them to believe me when I was younger. I really was a troublemaker and a brat. Meanwhile, my brother was the golden boy, no matter how he treated me in private. He always did well in school, always. Excelled, always made them proud. That's not something I can deny or take away from him. Maybe if I'd put more of my energy into being like him instead of rebelling, things would have been different. Maybe my parents would have found it easier to believe me or take my side. I don't know. I'm just really confused right now. I don't even know if I owe them an apology all my life. I've believed my parents favored my brother unfairly, but what if I never gave them a reason to see things differently? What if I'm not really the victim here? And even now, I still don't know if my brother had any idea when the wedding was going to happen. I'm just stuck, completely lost, and I'm desperate for some clarity. I don't know if I was wrong for telling my parents I'd wait and then getting married without them. My parents returned from their vacation, and as soon as they landed, they came straight to my house from the airport. I knew they had just arrived because they still had their bags with them when they got out of the cab. My wife and I have now been married for a little over a week. And we've talked about the whole situation with my parents several times. Also read through comments online and spoken to a few friends. Some support my decision, while others think I could have handled it better and avoided all the drama. But here's the thing, whatever damage was done, it's already done. I don't think my parents can move past it, and I don't think I can either. I had already given up hope of reconciling with them. Honestly, I didn't even want to anymore. It just felt pointless. All my life, they've always chosen my brother over me, and they didn't even deny it during our last call. Sure, they admitted it, but they also tried to shift the blame onto me in the same breath. I had accepted that we saw things differently. Maybe we were both right. Maybe we were all wrong. Either way, none of it mattered now. We couldn't undo what had already happened. That was the mindset I'd settled into, that we would all just go our separate ways and move on. But my parents clearly had something else in mind. When they showed up at my door, I was honestly confused. Seeing them with their luggage, I briefly worried they planned to stay with me, which freaked me out a little. But they quickly explained they'd come straight from the airport to my place, simply because I'd invited them earlier and they felt it was the right thing to do. They skipped all the small talk and told me outright that, judging by my recent behavior, it was clear we had a lot to address if we ever wanted our family to function again. I didn't know how to respond to that, mostly because I hadn't planned on having any big discussion with them. I already felt like it would just turn into another pointless cycle where we go around in circles. So I tried to tell them I needed some time and space to sort through my thoughts and emotions, but they weren't having it. They said they made the effort to come see me immediately after their vacation because I was important to them, and they expected me to treat them with the same significance. They insisted that we talk things out then and there. I was already emotionally exhausted from everything that had happened since our last fight, and their demand that I now play by their rules set me off. I snapped. I told them that just because they were ready to talk now didn't mean I had to be. If they had truly cared about making things right, they would have respected my need for space instead of trying to force the conversation on their terms. I reminded them that I wasn't some puppet they could control. I was my own person. That, of course, triggered another shouting match. They were frustrated too, and things quickly got out of hand until my wife had to step in and ask them to leave. She could see we were going nowhere fast, and a productive conversation was impossible in that moment. Just before they left, my mother, who's always been the more emotional one, said something that hit me harder than I expected. With tears in her eyes, she told me that maybe, somewhere along the line, she and my father had failed as parents. After all, she said, no child would treat their parents this way unless something had gone very wrong. But she also reminded me that I hadn't been a perfect son either, and yet they had always forgiven me and tried to keep the bond alive. She said that if they still mattered to me, then I needed to try to not to prove that I was always right or that I was the constant victim while they were the villains. But to actually repair the relationship, I wanted to fire something back. Say my own piece, but I couldn't. She was crying. And even though I was still angry, I couldn't bring myself to add to her pain. After they left, my wife calmed me down. I was still wound up, but we've been trying to figure out how to handle the situation ever since. The truth is, I'm completely torn. I don't want to paint my parents as villains, but I also don't believe I'm the one at fault here. I keep leaning toward blaming my brother for orchestrating this entire mess. But even now, I don't know for sure if he had anything to do with it. And even if he did, at the end of the day, it was still my parents who chose to miss my wedding and go on that trip. That decision was theirs. So here I am, feeling like I've ended up back at square one with no idea what to do or how to move forward. Before I jump into this next update, I want to address everyone who keeps suggesting I should just cut my parents off. It's not that simple. If it were, I wouldn't even be posting about this. I would have done it already. But families are complicated. Like I've said before, I really don't have anyone else besides my parents. And it's not like they've always been terrible to me. I've had good moments too. It's just a very complicated and messy situation. I can't claim I've always been right, but I can't say that about them either. At this point, I only see two paths ahead. Either I wait until things get so toxic that cutting them off becomes the only choice left, or I take a chance and try to talk things out, try to fix it. Right now, I'm leaning toward the second option. Because despite everything, I'm still trying to be the rational one. The last time I saw my parents was 3 days ago. The meeting didn't go well at all. Afterward, I had no idea what to do next. So I decided to stick to my original plan, keep things low-key, avoid confrontation, and maintain some distance. My wife agreed, since neither of us had a better idea for handling the mess we were in then. Last evening, I got a text from my parents. They apologized for how they acted during our last meeting. They said they regretted yelling at me and pushing the conversation when I clearly said I didn't want to talk. They admitted they should have respected my space instead of trying to force things. They said they were sorry for everything and still wanted to make things right. They asked if I'd be willing to meet them for dinner over the weekend. Now my wife and I are discussing whether or not we should go. We both know it's going to be awkward. There's no avoiding that. Too much has happened over the last couple of weeks to just pretend like everything's normal. But I can tell they're trying in their own way to fix things. And the truth is, I don't want to throw away my relationship with them. I'm willing to give them a chance. Maybe if we talk face to face, we can actually begin to mend some of the damage. It's clear that a lot of what went wrong between us was caused by miscommunication, assumptions, and long-standing resentment. But I don't want to lose my parents. I just don't. So unless something changes over the next couple of days, we're likely going to meet them this weekend and see if we can finally have an honest conversation. Wish us luck. I really hope it goes well. So, unfortunately, it didn't go well. I honestly regret giving them the benefit of the doubt. My wife and I showed up at their house last evening, expecting a quiet dinner and a talk. But my brother and his entire family were there too. My parents knew that I don't have a good relationship with him. They know how tense things are between us. And still, they sprung this on me without any warning. I don't care what their intentions were. It was wrong. I was clearly shocked to see him there. And judging by his reaction, he hadn't expected me either. So my parents had lied to both of us. When I confronted them about it, they said that most of the problems in our family came from the fact that he and I couldn't get along, that I believed they always treated him better, and that he thought I was a useless failure who still held a grudge for getting into a fight with him 10 years ago. Their brilliant solution: have dinner together and talk it out like everything would magically get fixed, I immediately told them that I had come to talk to them, not to my brother. And surprisingly, for once in our lives, he agreed with me. We were both ready to leave. That's when our mother, emotional, as always, started crying and said she couldn't believe that both her sons cared more about their own pride and egos than they did about family. I was about to respond, but my brother cut in. He finally snapped. He told her that if she wanted to talk about family values, maybe she should remember that she agreed to go on vacation with him even though she knew I was getting married at the same time. He called her out bluntly. Then, out of nowhere, he turned to me and dropped the truth. He said our parents had been lying to me the entire time. He did know I was getting married around the same time. The reason he planned the trip wasn't to sabotage my wedding. He was about to start a new project in a few weeks and wouldn't have time for vacations after that. He just wanted to squeeze one in while he could. He swore it had nothing to do with me, nothing personal. But he confirmed what I had always feared. Our parents knew the dates overlapped, and they still made the choice to go with him. They were trying to spin everything and make it look like he and I were equally at fault for everything that had gone wrong. And once again, it felt like they were protecting themselves by letting us take the blame. With all that finally out in the open, I knew there was no way I could keep my parents in my life anymore. Things had clearly reached a point of no return. For the first time, I had the clarity I'd been searching for. My parents had willingly chosen to go on vacation with my brother and his family, fully aware that it would mean missing my wedding. I didn't care what my brother's intentions were, whether he meant to ruin my plans or not. That didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that my parents had a choice, and they made theirs. Then they tried to backpedal, lie about it, and even gaslight me into believing I was the villain in all of this. That was the final straw, so I left. I walked out of their house, blocked them on everything, and I don't think I'll be reconnecting with them anytime soon, ever. My wife and I are genuinely happy together. And we've built a peaceful life without all that chaos. We were originally planning to wait a couple more months before going on our honeymoon. But with everything that's happened, I need a break from all of it, mentally and emotionally. So, we're going on our honeymoon sooner than planned, and honestly, that's that. I've accepted that I'm better off without my family.